Well, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. It's rare these days that people want to hear facts because fiction is so much more exciting. When you make up fiction, you're free to do anything, right? You can say anything. The world's your oyster. When you're talking facts, it's a lot more work to go and make sure that you're right and present the evidence, and it's not as glamorous. So, not many media outlets will actually cover facts because it's not as lucrative as covering fiction.
Yeah.
So, I'm especially appreciative of the chance to show some science.
Yeah, and as you can tell here, we've been having a conversation, and I figured might as well hit record because there was a lot of good stuff going back and forth there. Some probably not for public airing, but for the most part, all good. But my name's Justin Riney. This is Redefining Plastics. With me today, most people, if you're on LinkedIn, you know who this guy is. This is Dr. DeArmitt. He is a warrior for plastics and been an inspiration to me. One of the main inspirations why I'm doing this podcast, because he's been out fighting with the internet trolls and NGOs, really anybody who's going to listen about plastics, why plastics. And it's been really, really nice to see somebody speaking scientifically and directly to all of the anti-plastic movement. So Chris, thanks for joining. Really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, like I said, thanks for having me on the show. Let's get some facts out there.
Yeah.
Actually, pro-plastic, as you know, Justin, I'm just pro-facts, so I don't mind if people hate plastics, but as long as I hate them based on something that's actually true. The problem now is people hate plastics for things that are not true at all, and that's what bugs me as a scientist.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us about your work at Phantom Plastics.
Yeah, that's one thing people don't get. They think I'm this professional lobbyist or something, and I'm not. My actual job is being a scientist. I've done that my whole career. I work in materials, mineral fillers, reinforcements, plastics, and some of the world's biggest companies come to me when they have some kind of technical problem, and I'm a good problem solver. I've got patents and all of that stuff. So that's my career as a plastic person, scientist, let's say. And I'm independent. And if you look at my percentage of income, because everyone's always interested in that, from the plastics industry, according to NAICS code, it's actually zero. So there's no plastic manufacturers who are paying me. And that's my regular job. And then this whole environmental thing only sprang up, as you know, Justin, because my kids came home from school, my two daughters, and they'd been told stuff that was just outright lies by their teachers. And that infuriated me. I thought, how are we going to have a good future if we teach our kids nonsense? And we're here with insane property taxes in a nice area, especially for the good school district. And then to find out that my kids are being taught nonsense, that was just more than I could bear. So I went on a bit of a crusade and read 4,000 or 5,000 studies now to go and find the truth. Did it unpaid, as you know, as a hobby. I did it, and then I shared it for free. So that's where we are today. I appear to be the world's #1 expert only because no one else is that stupid to read 4,000 or 5,000 studies unpaid.
Well, I think reading all of the studies and fighting with the internet trolls, I think you have to be a little crazy to do both of those things. And I think you and I are both cut from the same cloth there.
Yeah, there's a bit of Don Quixote going on.
Yeah, exactly. So I just saw recently that your book, The Plastics Paradox, is now in Spanish as well, correct? It's just recently published?
Yeah, that's the amazing thing. I'm actually writing the new edition of the book, so
Okay.
that's a breaking story, and that's going well. The funny thing about the book was I don't actually care about waste or litter or life cycle studies. It's really boring stuff, but I do care about truth, and the only way to solve a problem is to know all the science. So I went off and read studies on all of those topics. That was about 400 studies, and to learn about things I didn't actually care about, just to cover the whole topic and understand really what's going on. And then when I'd finished, I was exhausted. I was convinced nobody would read the book. And the exact opposite happened. People started reading it and then asking me to translate it to their languages. I'm like, I'm exhausted. I've spent enough of my own time and money on this stupid book.
Yeah.
I'm sick of the sight of it. And now you're telling me to translate it. So I basically told them to get lost. And or at least I wasn't going to do it. So now it's available in 5 different languages because people have gone on their own spare time and translated it themselves. And then I got other people to volunteer to change it into a book. So I'm kind of surprised and honored that people thought it was that valuable that they wanted to themselves translate it.
So I think I saw on your website too that the book is free. if people ask for it? Is that how that works?
Yeah, it's free in all languages, and there's no mailing list. You know how people want you to put in your name and your email address, and it's a terrible marketing for me. I should have tens of thousands of people in a mailing list. I don't even have a mailing list. All I have is my inbox. So those are the people who've mailed me, and that's all I know. So the book is free. You just click the flag that corresponds to your language at phantomplastics.com or at plasticparadox.com. Um, I think it may be only the English one at Plastic Paradox, but Phantom Plastics, you can just click the button and get the PDF.
And so you and I, like we mentioned, are on similar crusades to kind of change the narrative around plastics, the why for plastics, and kind of defend the material's honor, not because we're making a ton of money in plastics, but because it's the right thing to do. And it's, like you said, scientifically proven to be the best option. And you've got a new venture that was just announced, the Plastics Research Council. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the nonprofit organization, and kind of what you're going to be doing with that?
Yeah, so I've been doing this silly crusade on my own for years now, 5 years, and two people came up to me at Inc. 4, that was in Ottawa, where people were talking about this plastic pollution and so forth. It's not actually pollution, but anyway, they're talking about it, and two people came up to me, of all of those people who had been following me, and said, "We want to fund a proper effort to get the facts out, because I have all the data, but it's just me in my spare time. As I said, I've been working for 5 years unfunded in my spare time whilst juggling it with my real job. And you can't do that properly. I mean, these people that we're up against, they are literally got millions and millions in funding. If you look at who's member of some of these organizations, they're just marketing people. They don't even have scientists in many cases. They're just out there paid millions to spread misinformation about plastics. And we know who's paying them too, because a lot of that's public record. And so when you go up against people who are well-funded and professional marketing people, you have to have some money and some professional marketing people. So the idea behind the Plastics Research Council was to have some funds to pay a professional marketer or marketers to get the facts out better than I can do on my own, to massage the message, to be more patient than I can be. I'm a scientist. I'm like, here are the facts, deal with them.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's Richard Dawkins' kind of approach, but it doesn't work with everyone. So that's the idea behind it. And nobody's taking a salary, in case all these other NGOs, they're all getting fat off of donations and telling whoppers, whereas we're doing it all for free. And I'm really honored to have such a world-class team of independent scientists. There's professors from all around the world, not just plastic, but in particles, in catalysis, in chemistry. We've got a toxicologist, we've got a life cycle analysis expert. So I'm really honored to have a team of world-class scientists who are behind this message and have seen the science and seen that this stuff all checks out. And I'd like to thank all of those people. They're on the website. It's at plasticsresearchcouncil.com. And at the moment, we're in this phase where people have asked me to do it. We've got a great team, and we're just waiting for donations to come in to get to the point where we can really make an impact.
Awesome. I look forward to supporting that effort. I think anything we can do to support your good work, I'm all for. So I think the next section of this conversation is kind of the meat of what I wanted to talk about. And I'm calling this reaching the lost regarding the plastics narrative. So this idea that you're an evangelist, right? You're a plastics evangelist, whether you wanted to be or not. At this point, that's kind of what you're known for on the internet, anyway. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how you got there and what you're doing. So your work on LinkedIn, it was a major inspiration for this podcast, like I said. How do you get the energy to fight these battles with people that are not receptive? I think is the easy way to put it. And they're scientifically illiterate, but they are very vocal about their
Yes.
beliefs. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of things. You know the movie The Blind Side, where they say he tested 98% positive for protective instinct. So we all have certain things that we're stronger in and less strong in. And I'm a crusader for truth. I mean, I say negative things about plastic. If plastic comes out as the worst solution, I say that. And there's examples in the book. So that's what gives me the energy. We cannot make a better future based on things that aren't true. If you make decisions based on stuff that's not true, you end up making things worse for the most part. And that's exactly where we are now. So we have a lot of people who are utterly convinced of their opinions. And this is the funny part. There was a study by Pew, and it's in the new version of the book. So if you look up how much confidence do the public have in the media, right? It's really, really low. So this is the funny thing. And then you ask them, well, where do your opinions on plastics come from? And like 100% of their opinion comes from media articles and headlines, right? They've never read a single scientific study in their whole life. And this is the best bit, right? And then they tell me I'm wrong. And you're like, well, hang on a minute. One of us has never read a single study, and the other one's a professional scientist who's read 4,000 studies or 5,000 studies unpaid and then shared it for free. Which one of us do you think's, more likely to be right? Not to say that the expert's always right, but is the person who's never read a single study really entitled to the arrogance, the sheer arrogance of these people, and the delusional idea that they have the answers on these topics when they've never actually checked any of the facts and they're relying on a source which they themselves don't believe in? That's the irony of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know where I get the energy from, but it's probably I'm a crusader for let's make a difference, let's make a better world. Um, and so that's probably the driving force. I've written 2 books, and both times I was really angry about something.
That's usually a pretty good driver. I think emotion is a good driver for anything, right? So specifically our
Yeah.
more base emotions, anger, love, happiness, whatever.
Well, I want to make a point on that because
Yeah.
that's exactly what the NGOs do. They
Yeah.
show us pictures of turtles and whales, and they play on people's emotions to empty their pockets. And the other side of the emotion is the time for emotion is after you know you're right. If you engage your emotions too early, you end up going really fast in the wrong direction. And that's what I see people doing now. Some of the people who care the most are passionately going in exactly the wrong direction with their cotton bags and their paper bags, for example. So that's a real shame that the people who care the most are doing the most harm because they didn't check the facts before they engage their passion.
And half the time they don't even know where to find the facts, right? I think
Right.
that's a big deal. I think I've said this multiple times and I'll continue to say it. Our industry does a really bad job of talking about the benefits of our products. And I'm in the industry. I'm not an unpaid consultant like you, so I have to take the blame here. And the fact that we've just done a really bad job for years talking about our products and the fact that they are a lower carbon footprint in 90+% of applications if you look at certain studies. We're not good at this. We have great marketers, but the
Yeah.
marketers are great at marketing to converters and brands. They're not good at marketing to consumers, I think. And maybe that's
Right.
unfair, but that's just kind of what I've seen. And we're
I think
jumping.
you're right. I think they thought it would go away. Everyone asked me, why didn't they do something? I think they all thought this isn't true, it will go away. And the other thing is, I think that many of them thought that the trade associations they pay millions and millions and millions of dollars to would do something. And to be fair, some of them are really good. Like I'll mention the PVC Pipe Association
Yep.
and the PPI and the EPS Association. Those are 3 that really do a good job. But there's one especially large one, probably the one that gets the most money and is expected to do the most. And their board members and their members call me and say, why are they so pathetic? Why are they not spending our money on what we're paying them to spend it? Can't you help them, Chris? They literally beg me to help these people. And it's ironic that I have the data, but they have the money. And these people literally get in front of Congress and have no answers. It's really sad to watch. So I think that's
Yeah.
another aspect that the people who were supposed to have done this job didn't take their job seriously.
Yeah. So we're jumping around a little bit, but like I said, I want this to be conversational. So I'm 100% on board with just wherever the conversation takes us. But so we talked a little bit about the emotion that's kind of driving this conversation. So it's an emotional conversation and a scientific. The
Mm.
doctored photos. I know you've done many posts, and you've got an article out there on your website that talks about the doctored photos of the sea turtles and the
Yeah.
eating the bags and then the EPS cup and the fact is that that artist was very clear that that was a doctored picture to show the connection between plastic waste and the sea turtles, which you rightly
Yeah.
point out, plastic waste is not really packaging when you look at the large majority of it, which
Yeah.
is great. And it's great that you're pushing that out there. But this has almost become part of the collective consciousness now. And where people think sea turtle, they immediately think plastic waste.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of emotions with that. Can we really use facts and science to combat that? Or do we have to do kind of what you're doing with the Plastics Research Council to hit more at the emotional strings rather than just facts?
Well, I guess it's, as you know, we're talking about reaching the consumer, and the consumer is not one personality. It's not one kind of person. So my experience is the number of people you can reach with my approach, which are here are the facts. If you really care, please look at them. That's about 2 or 3% of people. And I heard there's a famous quote from George Bernard Shaw. He said, 2% of people think, 3% of people think they think, and the other 95% would rather die than think. And that is exactly what I experience every day. Most people claim to be passionate, but they won't even spend 3 minutes to look at evidence. They're just so sure based on nothing, and that's a shame. So the answer is we definitely do need a varied approach because we're trying to reach a broad array of different people. And my approach is not that effective. It's like, here are the facts. Please take a look. And not many people are that logical. It takes a lot of mental energy to overcome a pre-existing opinion, and that's why the plastic industry has made a huge mistake. There's a thing called the illusory truth effect. So they've scientifically proven that if somebody lies to you enough times, the lie becomes the truth. It sounds like it's true, even though it isn't. And no matter how smart you are, it doesn't protect you. And we've allowed that to happen. We've had 5 or 10 years of just lie after lie after lie, pictures of turtles with bags which don't exist. Those are photoshopped. 100% of them are photoshopped. And yet this is what people equate plastics and bags with. When, if you were worried about turtles, just to put in a fact here, the latest scoop of what's in the gyre, it was 0.03% cups and bags and straws. There were 0 bags, 1 straw, and a couple of bottles. And the other 99% was fishing gear, which actually entangles turtles and whales and does harm to animals. And what are we proposing to ban and regulate? We're talking about the bags, which there was 0 of, 1 straw, and a couple of bottles, which have never caused any harm to anything in any study I've seen.
Yeah.
Whereas the nets, which are 99% and do cause proven harm, and we're ignoring those. There's literally thousands of people flying to South Korea to talk about the straw on the bag that doesn't exist and totally ignore the thing that is causing a problem, the 99%. And that's the kind of thing that drives me nuts as a scientist. If you're going to make a difference, spend 3 minutes to look at the science and make sure that you're focused on the right stuff. I always want to get a cartoon made of a guy smoking a cigarette and his house is burning down and the fire brigade comes and puts out his cigarette because that's the problem, right? And ignores the house. And you're like, no, the fire's over there. And I'm not trying to distract people away from the plastics thing because there is plastic in the ocean. It shouldn't be there. But for goodness sakes, if we're going to make laws and spend money and spend time and fly around the world, thousands of people to go into South Korea, let's actually make us, strike for justice and focus on something that matters.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this, but who do you feel like your actual target audience is on LinkedIn? Are you going direct to the consumer? Are you trying to talk to legislators? Who exactly are you really driving at?
I don't know. I've never thought about it. That's how rubbish I am as a marketer. So I am somebody who thinks that as a scientist, my job is done if I've put good science out there. And I want to be clear. People say, hey, this is Chris's stuff. None of this is mine. This is 4,000 or 5,000 studies from other people. Not one of them is mine. All I'm doing is quoting word for word what the science says, literally copied and pasted with no spin, and with a pretty picture so people don't fall asleep. And that's it. So I don't know who my audience is, but I have gathered a big following. I mean, I've reached hundreds of thousands of people on radio, on TV, through podcasts, through the book in 5 languages, and this has become like a second job for me. So it is reaching people, but I don't really know who the target demographic is. I guess it's anyone who genuinely cares enough to spend 3 minutes looking at facts. That's my target audience, and it's a small one.
Yeah, and I get that, right? Because for me, it's more of an existential concern for plastics because I'm in the industry, and this is my chosen profession. I love the industry; it's been great for me, and I feel almost indebted to it to protect the future of it because I do think it's a great product. I think it's the best product for the applications that they're used for. So this is quickly turning from a crusade that I'm doing part-time to there's a lot of people that want to talk about this. Just since I've done my first 2 podcasts, I've had 20 different phone calls of people wanting to be on the podcast. I've had a bunch of different things. And there's this pent-up desire out there within the industry to fight back, but nobody's ever known how to do it. Or maybe they weren't crazy enough like us to actually do it. And
Yeah.
and I feel like there are days where I'm getting through I'm getting to the consumer, but I don't know if it's having a desired impact. How do you feel about your efforts? Do you feel like it's having the desired effect?
I do have some insights there. So, first of all, it's wildly exceeded my expectations. Nobody knew about or read my first book. A few people did, including the CTO of Procter and Gamble, and she loved it, and Kathy Fish and other people. The president of Covestro at the time read it. So, but I didn't think anyone would read this one, and it's ended up making a really big impact. So, and one of the things I'll say is that large corporations like yours are handcuffed. They're full of politicians and lawyers who will make sure you never say anything. And that's one of the reasons that the plastic industry hasn't managed to get the message across. You've got 100 people telling you what not to do in a big corporation. And that's why I'm not in a big corporation. And so that leads on to two things. How am I bold enough to say the things I do? And A, because they're right, and B, because I don't have anyone to tell me not to, like you do. And another thing that leads on to, who is the most effective at fighting this battle? And I'll tell you who it is. It's family owned companies, privately held companies, because these are the only companies I see. And I'm not talking about small companies. The companies that have done the most in this area are companies that are, let's say, $1 to $5 billion a year in revenue, and who say, hey, this is right. Let's do it because it's right. They don't ask anyone. They click a button. They make a donation. I know companies that have printed thousands of copies of my book for free, right, and just given them out in different languages. I went to one company where all the offices were full of copies of my book in 5 different languages that they gave to, politicians and reporters and anyone who would listen. So there are people out there doing it, but it's not the really big companies because their hands are tied, and it's the smaller ones. So maybe some of these big companies can donate to the Plastics Council,
Yeah.
Plastics Research Council, as a way of having somebody who is allowed to talk do the speaking for them. We'll see if that happens or not.
Yeah, I could not agree more on the smaller. And when you say small, you think, like you said, like a real small business. We're talking the 1 to 5 billion range, the converters, the plastic converters, the family owned businesses. There's one that comes to
Yeah.
mind. I'm not going to throw the name out there because I don't know if they're going to like me doing that. But we just started the Polystyrene Recycling Alliance that's going to be focused on expanding polystyrene recycling in
Right.
the Americas, specifically because we're under a lot of threat. We talked a little bit there about the Global Plastics Treaty, and we'll get more into that because I know we both don't like that effort at all. But there are a couple smaller family businesses in that organization that are truly living this out. They are fighting, and they are evangelists like us because they don't have the overseer. And I think you'll notice whenever you listen to any one of my podcasts, videos online, anything like that, I will never mention who I work for. That is the one thing that I do. I want to make sure that I keep that separate. I think anybody can look and see who I work for, but this is my opinion and not theirs. And I feel
Right.
empowered enough to be able to say what the truth is and to
Right.
try to expand your reach, right? Because I think what you're saying is important and I want other people to hear it.
Well, let's say some things about expanded polystyrene because I've done a deep dive into that, and I've met some of the companies. And I'm not forbidden from talking about companies. So Atlas Molding, Atlas
Mhm.
Roofing, for
I know.
example, is one of the ones that I'm really impressed with because they're really out there. They have an incredible amount of recycled material, and they've been doing it for years and years. So it makes their blood boil when people say it's not recyclable. And the Expanded Polystyrene Association as well. I mean, this is it is recyclable, and it is recycled in huge amounts. So that's one thing to say. Another one is when you look at life cycle studies, which is the only way to know what causes more impact or less impact. For plastic packaging, plastic comes out as the least impact solution in 93% of cases studied. So you can be against plastic if you want to, but that means 4 times more waste, 3 times more CO2, and 2 times more fossil fuel used. If you think that's a wise choice, then you go right ahead and do it. I don't mind. But do it knowing that that's the consequence of your action. When it comes to people who don't have a life cycle study in front of them, the easiest way to know what's greenest is to just see what weighs the most. That when you can do the job with less material, that means it's usually greener because there's nothing there. And if you look at expanded polystyrene, it's 98% air. It's only 2% material. And this is the problem with EPS. It's too efficient. You see a giant block of material and you think, wow, look at all of that waste or all of that litter or whatever, or all that potential pollution that could get out into the environment. But it's only like a tiny, tiny amount of actual material. And so it's like an optical illusion. It's like David Copperfield has fooled you into thinking that there's this giant piece of polystyrene when you're really looking at a block of air with a tiny bit of plastic holding it together. And so that's the second thing to be aware of. It's often the greenest solution. Because of that, there's hardly anything there. Because it saves heat and weight during transportation, so it ends up being net negative for impact because it's saving so much heat and weight compared to other materials. And the other thing people don't realize is polystyrene actually does degrade and biodegrade. So they think it lasts forever in the environment, and that's wrong too. And there's study after study after study showing insects, for example, converting polystyrene into CO2 and water, just like a leaf would. So again, this is another area where the facts are on the side of that particular material. It's been well studied for decades, and not one single layperson knows about it.
Yeah, and I completely agree that Atlas and the EPSIA in general, so Betsy at the EPSIA, she is also an evangelist for plastics and a very good one at that. Got a ton of respect for that group. But yeah, and even rigid polystyrene it allows you to make these products thinner and lighter than even other polymers. And then specifically more than paper and metal or whatever else you're going to replace it with. So
Yeah,
banning those products is counterintuitive, right? It's not scientific. It is not logical. It is emotional.
yeah,
And that's the biggest struggle that I have on a day-to-day basis. How do I get through to the people that only think emotionally? And the bad thing is that's most of the legislators that I deal with. I talk to a lot of legislators, and they are listening to the emotional outcry of a small portion of their constituents. And that's what's driving this conversation. So how do you think we can get through to those folks to show that plastics are actually needed to decarbonize? If you want to hit your climate goals, you probably need more
yeah,
plastics. How do we get that message to them?
yeah. Well, there's a couple of things to say there. So one company, a privately held company in the revenue range that I mentioned, said, "Okay, I've had enough of this. I'm going to fund sending a copy of your book signed to every member of Congress," and that's happened, right? So that's a start. And then another company said, "Hey, let's do the same for the Canadian government." So those books went. I signed 535 copies in a weekend, and then I signed another 100 and something for the Canadian government just last weekend. So that's one thing we can do. Companies can get out there and at least make sure. Who knows if these people can read, right? I'm not a big fan of politicians,
Or if they
but
will read it, I think is the other
yeah,
question.
exactly. I'm sure they'll have the cleaning lady read it for them or something.
Yes.
But anyway, we're trying to make an effort, trying to at least give them a chance to see some facts. And this is the danger of lying to the public, right? Because if you lie to the public, they buy stuff that increases harm and they vote for stuff that makes things worse. And the politicians, let's face it, they're going to be tempted to just do whatever the public asks them for.
Exactly.
And that's a point I make in the first edition of the book, and it will be in the second one too. That's the danger of letting lies spread. We end up making things worse and instead of better.
Yeah.
And there's a big misconception as well that people think that this is a new area. It hasn't been studied. We don't have the solutions. And that's what the second edition of the book is about. It's going to show that we do have decades of studies and we do have the solutions that work. It's just that people aren't doing them right now. They're instead talking. They have huge meetings with tons of people, and none of those people have the facts in front of them.
Yeah. I've been involved in many NGO meetings, and it becomes very clear very quickly that there's not a single scientist in the bunch. And
I know.
a lot of them are making very impactful decisions and statements that a lot of people listen to. There are certain
Yeah.
NGOs, I think, I don't want to throw any of them specifically out there because I'm not looking to get sued this week, but I think you can think of who I might be speaking about. But those people will say very demonstratively that microplastics are killing us, that plastic pollution is clogging the ocean. And you rightly point out that plastics are only 1% of the materials that we're using. So why do you
Yeah.
think these environmental NGOs are so focused on plastics?
Well, just look at their pocketbooks, look at their bank accounts. And for example, it's very hard to prove when somebody's motives are what you think they are, or to work out what their motives really are. But we don't have to prove it because literally the former president of Greenpeace left. These two books are behind me. He literally said these people gave up on the environment decades ago, and now they're just telling lies for donations, including the plastics lies. And the other ones have gone, hey, look how much money they make from it. Let's do the same. Because the stuff they say just isn't true. And when they do say something that's proven to be false, they never take it back again. If somebody was genuinely virtuous and genuinely cared about the future, they would take back something that they'd said if it was proven to be wrong, like more plastic than fish by 2050. That's been proven wrong again and again and again. Like we eat a credit card of plastic a week. It would take 20,000 years to eat a credit card of plastic, according to the best independent study. But they've never withdrawn that either. So this is how we can tell, or at least infer, whether these people are genuine. Do they say things that are accurate? And when they're caught out saying something that wasn't right, do they correct the record? I've corrected my LinkedIn post before when I got new or better data. I went meticulously through about 100 posts because I got new data for the amount of the carbon dioxide created by plastics. And I went through to correct everything I'd ever said and update it in the new book. Didn't really make a difference, but still the number was wrong. I wasn't happy with it, and
Yep.
I wanted to be factually correct. But these people don't have any moral compass, and they don't have any virtue, and they don't have any desire to make the world a better place. And it's very apparent. And other ones, you don't even have to work it out because, for example, if you type in Michael Bloomberg Beyond Plastics, he funds Beyond Coal. So he's a billionaire, right? He funds Beyond Coal, Beyond Petrochemicals, Beyond Plastics is the latest one, and some other ones as well. And that's a matter of public record. He's out there proudly saying, I'm going to fund a group that attacks plastics. He's not saying I'm going to fund a group that helps the environment. I'm going to fund a group whose job it is to say bad things about plastics. And because they're a non-profit, they can call any journalist they want and get airtime because the journalist assumes that they have the virtue, but they don't have the virtue. Their agenda is clear in the name. And there are other similar organizations where the agenda and the solution is clear in the name, irrespective of the facts. And that's a problem too.
You wonder if Mr. Bloomberg there has shorted Exxon, Chevron,
Sure.
and the
Yeah.
others, and if he's trying to make a little extra money off of it. But yeah,
Well, the funny thing was, I've got a LinkedIn post called Oops, because it's called Bloomberg's Blooper. So you can look that up. And the reason he said he's against plastic is he thinks that they're creating global warming and that they're using fossil fuel. If you look at the data, plastics reduce fossil fuel and reduce greenhouse gas compared to other materials, and on a net basis as well. If you count in how much lighter cars are, airplanes are lighter, trucks are lighter, and insulating homes and preventing food waste. If you add that stuff together, plastics are net fossil fuel and CO2 negative. So that means this billionaire is so smart that he's spending millions of his money to fight against the very thing he believes in. And that's another example
yeah.
about people with insane amounts of, I wish I was so rich that I could spend tens of millions of dollars fighting against myself. That'd be tremendous. But unfortunately, I'm not in that position. And unfortunately, nobody's tapped Michael on the shoulder and said, hey, you might want to check your facts before you act.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's calling him out on it, right? There's nobody within the industry that's going to attack him, and that's the other thing. A lot of these conversations go out into a vacuum and they're unchecked, and nobody is challenging them at a high level. It's all just us grassroots out here fighting. Like I think the Don Quixote, that's excellent. I'm gonna use that from now on. Tilting at windmills, just not getting anything.
Yeah. And windmills are nice and green too. So it's a nice analogy.
Exactly. So we talked quite a bit already about the nature of plastics and the low carbon nature of plastics and how it actually is enabling decarbonization globally. And we also talked a bit about the Global Plastics Treaty. And so it has failed, right? It's failed to solve for climate change issues. If anything, it's going to increase climate issues. What do we think is going to happen if these high ambition countries get their way and we actually see elimination lists and production caps? What do you think the fallout for this will be?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is I was worried about that too. And then a friend of mine who's very, very smart said, don't worry, these people just push papers around and make declarations and nobody follows them. So don't panic, Chris, because whatever these idiots decide in a closed room or whatever they sign, it will never happen. So that was kind of reassuring. But it is true. I mean, the analogy, I always like to think of analogies because science is boring for most people. Imagine you've got 5 kids called paper, plastic, whatever, cotton and wood or something. And you decide to only punish the one who behaves the best, right? What kind of parent would you be? And that's exactly what we're doing. I'm not saying plastics are perfect. No kid is perfect either. But to only punish the one that does the least harm is totally unjust and counterproductive. And that's not how the world should work. Imagine you got imagine you had a serial killer and a bank robber and a guy with a parking ticket in the dock at the court, and the court said, let's let the serial killer and the the bank robber and all the other serious felons. We'll let them go and we'll punish this guy with the parking ticket and make an example of him. And that's exactly what's going on. It's not that plastics cause no harm. It's that the idea of penalizing and making more expensive the greenest option we have is just driving people to things which cause, as I said, on average, 4 times more waste, 3 times more fossil fuel, and twice as much. 3 times more carbon dioxide and 2 times more fossil fuel on average, and is increasing harm in 93% of cases. So that's just dumb, and that's what we're doing. And the thing is, imagine if I can come up with this on my own. You could go to Google right now and type in LCA for life cycle analysis bag. You would have a study from Clemson, which shows that plastic bags are the greenest option. There's 30 studies in the world and they all agree. So I'm not talking about some hidden tome of knowledge here that nobody can find. The World Wildlife Fund could have found it if they wanted to. Greenpeace could have found it. Our governments could have found it. Why have our governments and all these other people with unlimited interns and our taxpayers' money, it's never occurred to them in 30 years to type LCA bag into the search bar in Google? I mean, this is really pathetic. It's just, what's the word for it? Incompetence.
Yeah.
Negligence.
Negligence is probably a great word for it. So I've had many a conversation with NGOs, we'll call them grocery brands and different things. And I invariably will come back to carbon footprint, LCAs, and they push back and say, well, that's only part of the story. I was like, well, what other part of the story do we need to talk about? Like, are we trying to decarbonize or not? Yes, we have problems with waste in this world, but it's not just plastics. Everything is littered. And that's the part that I don't think is quite getting through to them, because nobody's putting any exposés out there about cans that are dumped into the waterways because they're sinking to the bottom and nobody sees them. And everybody can see the plastic floating on the top. So it kind of puts a bullseye on us. So with that in mind,
It's actually good because the plastic being on top means the sun gets to it and the bacteria, and it degrades faster than the other materials which sink.
well, that's helpful for my argumentation going forward, because I haven't used that one. But with all of this in mind, and this idea that there's a plastic waste crisis, what can society do to better handle the plastic waste issues? I know you said earlier that that's not really your domain that you focus a lot on, but I've seen several things that you've thrown out there for ideas on how to solve that. And I think they're great. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of talk through those.
Oh, all right. Thanks. So, well, let's start with the supermarket. You might have to remind me of the second part of the question. The supermarket people, they actually, because I thought, how dumb are these executives who are replacing plastic with paper? They're always like, we replaced 100 tons of plastic. And you're
I
like, yeah, with
diverted
400
this
tons
amount of material from the landfill. No, you didn't. That stuff's
Yeah.
not getting recycled
Yeah.
either. But anyway,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought, how dumb are these executives? They can't be that dumb. So they interviewed these supermarket executives and they said, oh yeah, we know that it increases harm to replace plastic, but we do it because our consumers want it.
Yeah.
And and there's a report on that, literally saying that. So that's where that's going. And what was the second part? Plastic waste. So
Yeah.
plastic
What
is
to do about it.
0.4% of
Yeah.
all waste. And 13% of what goes into a landfill, according to the EPA. And the funny thing was that landfill waste used to go up and up and up every year with population and wealth. And then it went flat all of a sudden. And scientists are scratching their heads. Why did it go flat? It used to go up all the time. So they analyzed the data and found out that it's plastics that have made the amount of waste going to landfill stop going up all the time and plateau. They call it a decoupling. And the reason is that on average, 1 pound of plastic replaces 4 pounds of other material like paper, metal, or glass. So although plastic was mushrooming, because it was starting from zero in the olden days and increasing rapidly, it was actually replacing far, far more other material and reducing materials use, reducing impact, and reducing waste. So, and that's a lesson that I'm pointing out in the second edition of my book, which is completely rewritten. It's not a rehash. It's from scratch. And that is saying that these NGOs only ever point out one side of an equation. They say, how much CO2 is created making plastic? And they say, oh, let's say 2% of all CO2 comes from making plastic. And they never mention making cars lighter, making planes lighter, making trucks lighter, preventing food waste, and all the things where plastic reduces CO2. So to know the net effect of something, you have to know the one side of the equation, the positives and the negatives, and then you put them together and work out what's the net effect. And they never do that. They only talk about the negatives because that's what makes people angry. That's what makes people donate. And that's what enriches them. And they go running all the way to the bank. based on these lies and misconceptions. And so that's a big part of it, is not to say rah rah plastic, but it's intellectually dishonest to ignore the positives of something in an equation and only talk about the negatives. Imagine I wanted to know whether you were in debt or not, and I said, "Oh, Justin's got $1,000 on his credit card," and you're like, "Yeah, but I got 100K in the bank." Whoa, whoa, whoa! We don't count the 100K. We're only going to look at the $1,000 of credit card debt. That would be really dumb and dishonest, and that's not how maths works. But that's how NGOs work.
Yeah. So I know you've talked a lot about fines for littering, and
Mhm.
I think you spent quite a bit of time talking about like redemption systems. Because to me, the easiest way to solve any kind of plastic crisis or any kind of waste issue at all is you have to give Americans specifically a reason to do something. And really, what
Mhm.
drives Americans more than anything? Money. So you have to have some sort of a redemption system. Or on
Mhm.
the other side, a negative impact if you just toss this stuff out the side of your car. Because really, that's the only way you're going to solve this stuff. You have to incentivize because only 40, I think the most recent numbers I saw, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you're the expert here. 43% of Americans actually participate in recycling. And
Mhm.
it's just adding to this issues because all of these NGOs for years have said that this stuff doesn't work. Recycling doesn't work. It's all going to the landfill anyway. And to your point, maybe that's not a bad thing. It's
Yeah.
less than paper and less than glass. But what do you think? What do you think about just that thought process? Like, how do we go
All
about
right.
this?
So there's many things to tackle there. One is even the plastics companies are getting this wrong. I literally see Borealis, for example. It's a real nice polyolefins company, squeaky clean plants. I visited them many years ago. You could eat your dinner off the plants, the factories. Even they are out talking about plastic pollution. Scientists have proven that this pollution they're talking about is actually litter. And what happens is this: somebody drops a piece of litter here, it goes along a stream or gets blown somewhere. Somebody picks it up somewhere else and goes, "Oh, look, pollution." But it's just litter that moved. Scientists have proven that. They call it it's like an archaeologist study of where is this pollution coming from. And as soon as you realize that that pollution, it's the wrong word, we have to use the right word. Pollution is associated with big bad industries. They say that Coca-Cola is the number one polluter, and that's a lie. And the courts have determined that's a lie, right? The judge said this is a ridiculous claim. If some of their customers drop litter on the floor, that's not Coca-Cola's fault or PepsiCo's fault. That's a legal fact and a scientific fact. So once you realize that it's litter and it's down to human behavior, you have the solutions. And that's what the second edition of the book is about. Once you correctly diagnose the problem, it's litter, you know, which is caused by people's behavior. So 81% of it is dropped intentionally. They literally watch the person drop it on purpose. And whenever I say that, they're like, whoa, 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 how can you blame the person for the litter? I'm like, well, who else am I supposed to
Yeah.
blame? Imagine you go outside in your garden, drop a candy wrapper, and then blame the candy wrapper. I mean, you'd have to be a moron to do that. I mean, that's just so ridiculously unjust. It's beyond words, right? And yet that's what people are claiming. So the courts luckily got that right. And they've also ruled that gun manufacturers can't be responsible if you buy one of their guns and go and shoot somebody with it. That's the act of the person. And we have to get that right, because as soon as we do, we know that solutions to litter are education, deposits, as you mentioned, and fines.
Yeah.
That's what is proven to work. And we know that it's dropped intentionally, and we know that it's not really pollution. So all the solutions are there, and not one of these people having these discussions and flying around the world is aware of them. And the ones who are aware of it are the people who are maybe not inclined to act upon it because they make a living from these perceived problems.
Yeah. So we've been talking now for about 45 minutes, and I know you're busy, and I want to take up a ton more of your time, but I want you to be able to tell the audience how they can get involved, in this fight, how they can make a positive difference, and maybe how they can reach you, how best they can reach.
Yeah. That's the number one question I get after my keynote talks. People are blown away to see the facts for the first time. Plastics industry people are proud of their jobs again because at the moment they're ashamed of their jobs. They can't get new undergraduates
Yeah,
into the
the amount
plastics
of people
industry.
that have told me, "Hey, you work for the plastics industry, isn't that like working for big tobacco?" Like, no, 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 no,
I
not
know,
even close. And
I know.
it's frustrating. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is this. People don't want to read a lot. You need to have the facts, but only in the background, right? That's in the book. It's on the website. I've cited hundreds of studies where you can click the link. It's all. So the thing to do is go to phantomplastics.com and click on the Plastic and Environment tab. and the tab itself, not the drop down thing. Just click on that. There's a 1-page summary with a video with a picture of some flamingos there. You'll know more than any of your friends about plastic in the environment. You can read the page in 5 minutes. You can see the video in 20 minutes, and you will be an expert. You will have the answers to every aunt and uncle and grandma and teacher who asks you this, and go out and get the facts and point them to the website. That's the number one thing you can do. That just that one page, if people saw that, they wouldn't be doing stupid stuff that makes things worse. To support me personally, because I've done all this unpaid, the only thing I do that is paid is when people pay to fly me somewhere to go and give this talk in person. Because after all, it's free in the book, it's free on the website, it's free in my LinkedIn post. If you want me to leave my job and my family and come and talk to you, then it has to cost money. So that's the only thing that's keeping me financially able to keep going as an individual. And then if you want to help market the message out, then that's the Plastics Research Council. That's where we're all working unpaid. We have a team of just fantastic experts in all subjects, and we want to be able to get marketing out. We need to get in front of the media. We need to get some commercials out there. We need to have somebody who can massage the message and reach the emotional people that I don't know how to reach. So those are the 3 ways you can help. Thanks for asking that. It's a great question.
What about any other parting comments? Any other topics you wanted to highlight today? Anything else going on in your world that you wanted to throw out there for the audience?
I think that's it. I'm pretty excited about the new edition of the book. If anyone has any ideas of things you'd like to see covered, then write to me. Please make sure people are aware of my LinkedIn posts. Make sure that people that you know are forwarded there so they can see the facts. Everything's well documented, as I said. One thing I didn't bring up earlier, and because you were saying, what can Americans do? What motivates people? This is the sad truth about plastics in the environment. They studied why are people talking about bags and straws, which make no difference to the environment. The things you can do to actually help the environment are fly less, drive less, and eat less meat. Those are the three main things you can do. Nobody wants to do any of those things, so they talk about straws all day long. And that is the real problem here. People want to feel good about themselves. They want to feel virtuous. They want to look good to their friends, but they don't actually want to do what it takes to be a good person. So if you're out there and you're listening, stop pretending to be good and actually be good.
Yeah, I'd say
that's my talent.
Yeah, virtue signaling in the US is at an all-time high over the last 5 years, and it I don't see any signs of that slowing down. But anyway, Dr. Chris DeArmitt, thank you so much today for the time. I really appreciated the conversation. Like I said earlier, I love your work. Keep on fighting. I'm going to try to support you in any way that I can, and I'd love to at some point have you back on again and talk some more about all these topics.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Justin.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks to the audience.